Welcome back to TalesBlip. And today's story is The Unexpected Journey. Hi, I'm Alex, a 28-year-old software engineer from New York City. I've always been a bit of a wanderer at heart, curious about the world beyond the concrete jungle I call home. One day, as I was scrolling through my social media feed, I came across a post about a remote hiking trail in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. The photographs were breathtaking, and the caption promised a journey of self-discovery and reconnection with nature. Without hesitation, I knew I had to experience it for myself. The flight back home was nerve-wracking. I'm not great with small spaces, and not being able to smoke made it even worse. I spent the whole flight fidgeting and walking back and forth to the restroom. Even though I didn't really need to go, I just needed to move around. When I landed, my dad was already waiting for me, which ruined my plan of sneaking in a quick cigarette. He gave me a hug and helped me load my bag in the car. I decided I needed a smoke badly enough, so I lit one up in the parking garage. My dad had never seen me smoke, and I tried to act as casual as I could. He raised an eyebrow at me as he closed the trunk. I waited for a lecture or an outburst, but all he did was nod and say, "That's a nice lighter." I hadn't realized I was still fidgeting with it. I told him it was a gift from my girlfriend, Ellen, that she'd found at an antique store in Seattle. He took it, looked it over approvingly, and then handed it back, telling me there'd be no smoking in the car, as my mother would never let us hear the end of it. When we got to my parents' house, my mom greeted me with a hug. She then stepped back and looked me up and down, saying, "Your father used to smoke menthols too when he was your age." She gave my dad a smirk, and he just gave me a pat on the shoulder and walked into the house. Over the next few days, we made arrangements for my grandparents' funerals. They had decided on closed caskets, as the injuries my grandfather had sustained in the accident were too gruesome for an open casket. As for my grandmother, they did a closed casket so that people wouldn't ask questions. Before the funeral, my dad asked if I could take a week off from school to help clean up my grandparents' farm, as they needed to sell the property. They were struggling to keep up with the upkeep, and my grandparents' diminished health had left the place in pretty bad shape. I agreed, knowing it was the least I could do. When we arrived at the farm, I noticed a large scarecrow standing over the cornfield. My dad seemed unsettled by it, but he didn't say anything. As I started to explore the property and pack up my grandparents' belongings, I came across a letter from my grandmother, detailing her concerns about my grandfather's worsening dementia and his obsession with the scarecrow. I knew then that there was more to the story than what my parents had told me. I also knew that I would never be able to convince them to believe me, even if I tried. Some secrets are better left buried, and this was one of them. The events that unfolded on that farm will forever haunt me, but I will carry the truth of what happened to my grave, just as my parents will. As I began sorting through my grandparents' belongings, I stumbled upon more unsettling clues. My grandmother's letter was not the only evidence of the strange occurrences on the farm. I found old photographs, newspaper clippings, and even a few handwritten journals that hinted at a much darker history. The photographs were the most disturbing. They showed the scarecrow, standing tall and menacing in the middle of the cornfield, its button eyes staring lifelessly into the camera. But what was most unsettling were the subtle changes in the images, as if the scarecrow had moved or shifted its position between shots. The newspaper clippings were equally puzzling. They detailed a series of unexplained disappearances and accidents that had plagued the area over the years, all seemingly connected to the presence of the scarecrow. Farmers had gone missing, crops had withered and died, and livestock had been found mutilated in the field. As I delved deeper into the journals, the true horror of the situation began to unfold. My grandfather's entries, written in a shaky, frantic hand, described his growing obsession with the scarecrow and his belief that it was somehow responsible for the prosperity of their farm. He recounted how a mysterious stranger had gifted them the scarecrow, promising that it would bring them an unparalleled harvest. At first, my grandfather's journal entries were filled with excitement and gratitude, as the crops did indeed thrive in a way they had never seen before. But over time, the tone shifted, becoming increasingly paranoid and erratic. He wrote of strange occurrences, of the scarecrow seemingly moving on its own, and of a growing sense of unease that permeated the entire farm. The final entry, scrawled in a barely legible script, chilled me to the core. "It won't let me harvest the crops," my grandfather had written. "The scarecrow, it's alive, I know it. It's keeping me from my work, from my livelihood. I have to stop it, I have to." The entry ended there, and I couldn't help but wonder if my grandfather had met his demise in a desperate attempt to confront the entity that had so thoroughly consumed his mind. As I sat in the dusty farmhouse, surrounded by the relics of my grandparents' lives, a growing sense of dread began to creep up my spine. The scarecrow, with its ominous presence and the trail of tragedy it had left in its wake, was not simply a figment of my grandfather's imagination. There was something inherently sinister about it, something that defied logical explanation. I knew then that I couldn't leave this place without uncovering the full truth. I had to understand what had happened, not just for my own peace of mind, but to honor the memory of my grandparents and to ensure that no one else would fall victim to the dark forces that had consumed them. Grabbing a lantern and a handful of matches, I ventured back out into the cornfield, guided by the faint glow of the scarecrow's ominous presence. As I drew closer, I could feel the air around me grow thick and heavy, as if the very fabric of reality was being distorted. Suddenly, the scarecrow surged towards me, its burlap form twisting and contorting in a way that defied the laws of nature. I raised the lantern, swinging it with all my might, but the scarecrow batted it aside effortlessly, the glass shattering on the ground. In a desperate act, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my trusty lighter, flicking the flame to life. The scarecrow hesitated, its button eyes fixed on the tiny flame, as if it could sense the danger. Without hesitation, I hurled the lighter towards the scarecrow, watching as the dry, straw-filled body erupted in flames. The scarecrow let out an unearthly scream, its form twisting and contorting as the fire consumed it. I turned and ran, the roar of the blaze and the agonizing cries of the entity spurring me forward. I burst through the cornfield, stumbling back towards the farmhouse, where my father stood in stunned silence, his eyes fixed on the billowing smoke in the distance. In the days that followed, the authorities investigated the incident, but there was little evidence to suggest anything more than a tragic accident. My parents never spoke of the scarecrow again, and I knew that they, like me, would carry the truth of that day to their graves. As I reflect on the unexpected journey, I realize that it was not just a physical trek through the wilderness, but a profound exploration of the darkest corners of the human experience. The scarecrow, with its haunting presence and otherworldly power, served as a stark reminder that even in the most serene of settings, there can lurk forces beyond our understanding, forces that challenge our very conception of reality. In the end, I know that I will never truly be able to reconcile what happened on that fateful day. But in the quiet moments, when the city's noise fades and the wind whispers through the trees, I can't help but wonder if the scarecrow still lingers, its button eyes forever fixed on the horizon, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. The thought sends a chill down my spine, for I know that the scarecrow's malevolent influence extends far beyond the confines of my grandparents' farm. It is a dark entity, one that has likely claimed countless lives over the centuries, feeding on the fears and obsessions of those who cross its path. I've tried to put the experience behind me, to move on with my life, but the memory of that day haunts me. I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a glimpse of the scarecrow's ominous form lurking in the shadows. The knowledge that it may still be out there, biding its time, is a burden I struggle to bear. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I wonder if I should have done more, if I should have delved deeper into the history of this sinister entity, searched for a way to vanquish it for good. But the fear of what I might uncover, of the horrors that could be unleashed, holds me back. I'm not sure I have the strength to confront the darkness that the scarecrow represents, and so, I live with the weight of this secret, knowing that I hold the key to unraveling a mystery that spans generations. I wonder if there are others out there, survivors of the scarecrow's wrath, who carry the same burden. Perhaps, one day, our paths will cross, and we can find the courage to stand united against this ancient evil. For now, I remain vigilant, ever watchful for any sign of the scarecrow's return. I know that it is out there, waiting, its unearthly presence a constant reminder that the line between the natural and the supernatural is far thinner than we dare to imagine. And in those quiet moments, when the city falls silent, I can't help but wonder, what if the scarecrow is watching me too?